Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our YouTube channel. Today, of course, we are reviewing Back to the Future
Part 2.
If you notice, we're in a bit of a different recording space, maybe a
Yeah.
little more permanent. Dylan worked really hard on this.
Yeah, it took me all of about 2 hours.
Yeah, we thank
The
Dylan
posters
for
were
his
the
hard
hardest
work.
part. Getting those straight was a task.
Mm-hmm.
I will say, if you look at them extremely closely, they're not perfectly straight, and it bothers me. But it's really hard to tell on camera, so
Yeah.
good luck.
And we're hyping ourselves up for Mulan, if you can see it through the glare.
I don't think this one's glared too bad. I know this one's got a big glare on it, so just ignore that.
All right. But anyway, let's talk about our movie this week. So
Yep.
obviously, last week we talked about the original Back to the Future and
From 1985.
1985, and we had the opportunity to also see this one on the big screen.
Big
is a
screen
kind
is
word, but we saw it in the theater. So I mean, another cool experience. I had seen this one as well.
Yep.
It'd been a long time, and I honestly, the only part that I even had any vague memories of was the first act in the future. I didn't remember the rest of the movie.
I've seen this one probably just as much as I've seen the first one. So.
Yeah.
Big fan.
But so yeah, coming in, I was like, I knew I'd seen it. The scene I think I remember the most is the scene where like he's looking at the theater and this holographic Jaws like Saul's in Jaws 19. Anyway, so yeah, I was excited to go back to it and revisit it and see what I thought about it. After last time I said I was kind of surprised at how much I liked the first one. I was excited to go back to this one and see if I liked it more than I remembered. So.
That's fair.
Anyway,
some production intro. Pretty much the same cast and crew as previously before this movie was released. I believe November 22nd of 1989.
Yeah.
Around the Thanksgiving time frame, and stars the same people, written by the same people. So Robert Zemeckis is the director, written by Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale. We got Michael J. Fox. This time instead, we have Elizabeth Shue playing his love interest Jennifer. As well
we
as
still have Christopher Lloyd and Leah Thompson and
Thomas Wilson, I believe.
Thomas Wilson for the
for
bad guy.
Biff
and
Biff
Griff.
and Griff.
So yeah, I guess just going ahead and getting into it. I really liked the movie last week. I'd forgotten how good it was. I think this time kind of reminded me why I didn't really care for Back to the Future. Not to say it's bad. But it's definitely a step down. I feel like I think I like the future, the first act. It has a very strong 3-act structure, and each act takes place in a different time period. The first act, the part that I remembered, is the part that's set in 2015, the future.
The future of the past now, 5 years in the past.
Yeah,
now.
and I do like that part of the movie. I like their idea of what the future would look like.
Yeah.
It's
really cool. That was always my favorite part as a kid when I was watching it growing up.
Yeah.
Was the future aspect of it. It's really cool to look back now and see how much didn't play out, and some things that did, which are really cool.
Yeah.
But I always loved that part. I thought it was really neat, their vision for what the future would be like 30 years from when the movie was made. But
and this movie gets right to it. I mean, we
picks up exactly where we left off.
The brief recap at the beginning of the movie, which you mentioned they had to refilm because of the change in actress.
They did. Elizabeth Shue replaced Claudia Wells in this movie.
But so we get right into it. But it's pretty evident early on that the thing that I don't like about this movie is, one, it ventures into slapstick comedy.
That's the point. That's what they were
often
going for, though.
And I mean, I thought in the first movie they balanced that pretty well. Here, I think I don't like slapstick comedies in the first place. I think here it kind of gets on my nerves after a while. Like a lot of sequels, this movie starts to repeat itself a lot. Like they redo the skateboard thing with a hoverboard this time. I'll give them that one. But especially when we get to the third act of this movie and they travel back to 1955 again, Avengers Endgame stole their middle act from this movie's third act. But I didn't like it in Avengers, and I don't like it here, that we're just kind of doing a highlight reel of the first movie while new stuff is going on. And I think this goose egg chase over this stupid book goes on way too long. And I'm really bored of the movie by the time it's over, if I'm being honest. And I don't know. It's a lot of stuff like that. I think, last time I said how everyone, it was intentionally, overperforming, and being, really exaggerated. Here again, I don't know, it starts to wear on my nerves after a
I don't know,
while.
man. I've always liked this movie a lot. I don't think it's quite as good as the first one. Uh, it's a slight step down, but I don't think it's that far a step down. I've always really enjoyed it. I like most aspect of this movie. I think it's really interesting them kind of reliving the scenarios from the first movie just from a different point of view, and it's really cool to see a lot of those scenes and scenarios from an alternate POV shot or whatever, however they choose to do it.
Yeah.
There's still a lot of clever writing, I think, in this movie too.
No,
And there's a lot of setup, a lot of dialogue and setup for things that will play out in the third movie, which is really clever at the same time. I think the biggest thing that you can commend this movie on though is not the writing, but the visual effects and how they were able to pull off a lot of the stuff they were able to pull off with. Essentially, in certain scenes, I mean, there are certain scenes in that first act or in the future where they have 3 versions of Michael J. Fox on screen at the exact same time. Granted, one of them is extremely scary to look at, but actually, there's one scene in the movie where there's technically 4. I mean, I imagine 1 or 2 of them is a body double at that point, but Michael J. Fox's character Marty is a 47-year-old man, and then, or I guess 3. Him as an old man, and then the person playing his son, and then the person playing his daughter, or the same all him supposed to be. But,
yeah, you said smart writing. Actually, I was thinking as I was watching it, in the first one I commended it because I said it, for a time travel movie, I thought they minimized plot holes pretty much to the best of their ability. This one, there's some of these things they know are bad and they play it off as like a joke or whatever, like all of his family looking like him, but it's kind of a plot contrivance, convenience that his son looks exactly a lot like he does, or that Biff's grandson looks exactly like he does, and that kind of thing. And then I was kind of wondering, like, the whole thing that gets this plot in motion is the idea that the doctor has to take them into the future to prevent his son from going to jail. When I'm like, the doctor who's so concerned about altering things, I think he probably could have done that in the present, with just like told Marty to not let his son do that in the present to avoid that in the future without having to take everyone to the future. Now I realize this movie is not taking itself too seriously.
No.
And that, we're supposed to kind of laugh at some of this stuff, but it's still, just not as cleverly written as I thought the first one was, which kind of bugs me. But no, I agree. I think visually this movie looks very good. I don't hate this movie on any stretch. I think it was still a well-made time travel movie. I think I like the stuff in the future. I think it's fun. I like I
kind of like, a lot of people have over the years, which from what I understand, when this movie came out, it received some mixed reviews, but as time has gone on, fans have been more kind to it. It's gained a pretty strong cult following.
I feel like it's almost as famous as its predecessor.
A lot of people now have gone back and said it's one of Robert Zemeckis' best films that he's made, behind the first Back to the Future and Forrest Gump. But also people have also said it's one of the best sequels ever made.
No.
I wouldn't go quite that far. One of the best sequels ever made, but it's still a really solid outing as far as it goes in this franchise. I've always really enjoyed it a lot. I like the second, but what I was saying is I really like the second act where we go to this alternate 1985 and we kind of see it. And when it originally came out, a lot of people didn't like it because it was so dark and a different take. But I kind of like it.
Dark. What was dark about it?
I mean, some of it's meant to be funny, but like how it's dark and dingy and grungy, and how
the middle act when they're Well, yeah, I mean
we find out Biff killed his father and stuff like that.
And it's actually not. They don't spend too much time in the present in this movie. That's probably the shortest segment of this movie. I mean, I didn't think it was too dark. I thought it's still the whole thing with every time Biff's on screen, they're playing it off as a joke. I mean, yeah, the one thing I did, since you do say that, I think kind of a abrupt tone shift is when he starts abusing Leah Thompson, and then she has Stockholm syndrome or whatever it is. That was kind of a dark moment in an otherwise really lighthearted movie. I was kind of like, wow, that's kind of out of place. But aside from that, I never got the feeling that this was like dark. But I don't know.
And then the third act is where we basically just relive the first
Yeah.
movie for the most
It
part.
allows them to recycle sets. What? But
I've always liked the third act as well. I think it's really cool how we go back and, like I said at the beginning, we get to see a lot of the things that play out in the first movie played out from a different angle and a different point of view, and you get to watch them through Marty's eyes after he's already lived through them. It's kind of cool.
Yeah.
But other than that,
I guess.
final thoughts.
Final thoughts.
Well,
Again,
stream it, skip it. I'll let you go first.
You want me to go first? All right. Well, like I've said, I didn't enjoy this movie as much as I did the first one. I think because I had seen this one on TV, and I think this is probably why I never really cared for Back to the Future as much as everybody else did. I think it, like a lot of sequel, it kind of has sequelitis. It repeats and a lot of stuff that the first movie does, and it tries to capitalize on the first movie's success. Again,
it did it well.
In-game style, it does it in the third act. Like, we're kind of reliving the highlights. I get bored in this movie. I find, especially in that third act, when they spend like forever chasing after that stupid book and they never can get a hold of it. And then, it's you commended it for, setting up the third movie. I think it gets a little preoccupied in setting up the third movie. Like, after the third Old West reference, I'm like, okay, I get it. We're going to the Old West next time. And then there's a huge cliffhanger at the end. And it's not as a self-contained... I always appreciate self-contained stories. And this is more or less a self-contained story. But there is a big cliffhanger, unlike the first movie, where it could just be...
its own
there
thing.
was a stinger at the end of the first movie, but... It's not a stinger that necessarily had to have a sequel made to it. It could just be a fun little stinger. This one, there has to be a sequel made to it for it to be complete. Which, is whatever you think of it, I guess. But no, as a whole, I do think it's a step down from the sequel. I don't think it's as cleverly written. I think there's a lot of plot contrivances, and I get bored. I'm not a big comedy fan anyway, and I get bored of the slapstick comedy pretty early on in this movie, and it's just not as original as the first one, and I just don't enjoy it as much. I'm still going to say stream it because I think, like you mentioned, the effects alone are probably worth watching this movie. And there's some clever stuff they do in the future, and this set design and all that it still makes this movie fun, and is the reason why it's still considered a classic. But yeah, personally, I don't enjoy it near as much as I did the first one.
That's fair. I've always, like I said, I've always really, really enjoyed this movie. It's not quite as good as the first one, but I don't think it's a large step down. I think it's still just as funny, just as entertaining. And then the visual effects alone are definitely worth the watch. And it's really incredible what they were able to accomplish and be able to put the same person on the screen 3 or 4 different times and make it look, for the most part, as seamless as it did. Now, you pointed out, like, there's a scene with old Biff and young Biff sitting in a car, and you can clearly tell there's a division. It's like almost like a green screen effect.
Yeah.
But
then later when they have Christopher Lloyd on the screen, there's a telephone pole
right in the middle of the shot.
Yeah.
It works really well, though. They were able to accomplish a lot. And like I said, I've always enjoyed how we get to go back and relive the first movie through Marty's point of view, as we've seen him already lived through it already. But it's I've always really, really enjoyed this movie, and I think the writing is still really clever here. Not as clever as the first one, and not as original, but I mean, it doesn't have to be original when it's a sequel, in my opinion. I mean, it needs to be its own story, but we're still kind of trying to piggyback off the first movie, and that's what they're going for here. I'm gonna say buy it, obviously, because it's sitting right there, but I really like it.
Well, just because I buy a movie doesn't mean I necessarily always think someone else should have to buy it. Sometimes I'm like, oh, well, that wasn't worth it. Chunk it. But yeah, obviously you're the big fan, and you love these movies. But anyway, next week we'll be back with the concluding chapter.
Back to the Future, Part 3.
Part 3, even though they're going to the past, but I guess they're still trying to get back to the future. I don't know. But anyway. So yeah, hopefully you enjoyed us going back and reviewing these old movies. Hopefully soon we'll get to review some new movies. But anyway, other than that, anything else we need to talk about while we're here?
There's a couple tidbits of news. I don't know if you want to do a separate video on them, but the Snyder Cut's getting released. We found that out.
Cut.
It's going to be released on HBO Max next year. I saw Warner Brothers is spending like $30 million to finish
Supposedly it's
finish
gonna
the
be
movie.
like 4.5
Four and a half hours, something like that. That's a movie.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we'll watch it.
I'm
but-
gonna watch it, and I'm interested to see if it'll be any better, if at all.
Spoiler alert! I've seen Zack Snyder's other movies. They're not any better.
Zack Snyder has some decent movies. I don't hate Man of Steel.
Not recently.
And I don't hate 300. I actually kind of like 300.
Did you see Batman vs Superman?
Actually, I will say, I'll give him credit for a director's cut. The Ultimate Edition director's cut is actually a much better movie.
Is it really?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's put together better than the theatrical release, but not everyone has time to sit and watch a 3-hour long, director's cut of a movie.
Yeah,
Or,
I guess I'll sit down.
I guess we're gonna find out because the internet demanded it, and it happened.
It happened.
Other than that, I don't know really much else to talk about. We might do a reaction to the new Tenet trailer, but I'm not sure. Aaron and I will talk about it.
We'll see. It's a lot of work for a movie that we've already seen like 2 trailers for.
Other than that, we are going to review Back to the Future Part 3 next week, and then we'll get into Indiana Jones.
That's right. And of course, Tenet will serve as our next Christopher Nolan movie, right?
No, we'll watch The Dark Knight first.
Oh, The Dark Knight. And then, okay. But anyway, so The Dark Knight will be coming up next month. But other than that, as always, I got to plug my our other podcast, Stomp This Way, where we review a different giant monster movie every week. But as far as this podcast goes,
we are up on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So if you want to follow us on our social medias, go ahead and be sure to tell your friends about us.
Or podcast. It's a YouTube channel. I get that. You can use it or whatever. That's right. And as always, don't forget that you need to subscribe to our channel and like this video.
Absolutely. And I think that about wraps it up for this week.
So we'll see you next
catch
time.
you later.